Of late, we've had some great revelations with laws for domestic violence being understood and helped to counteract when that happens to men and women in domestic violence. When it comes to leases, we've got expert here, Rosie Sullivan, who is chairman of the Northern Beaches Women's Shelter, and we're going to come to you with some great information to help you or some friends out.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morning Minutes, episode 391 with myself, Michael Berger, Mark Novak, and special guest Rosie Sullivan. This morning, we're going to be talking about domestic violence, breaking a lease. We've seen an increase in domestic violence, drug overdoses, which is a bit of another increase from lockdowns globally, also locally. And I think it's a very important topic to talk about because a lot of people, it's not something you may talk with friends, so it's that you need the information out there. So feel free to comment, share the video, and welcome Rosie. Thank you for coming on.
Absolute pleasure, Michael. Always happy to talk with Novakians.
Yes. So Rosie, tell us a bit about what you do on the women's shelter side and also in the educational side of real estate. So you have a great insight of both sort of angles and how to help.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, we've had a women's shelter on the Northern Beaches for 10 years now. Look, there are a couple of other shelters that are, different types of arrangements, some for women with their children, some for women without custodial care of their children. It's unfortunate that we have to have these services. However, even the services that we've got aren't near enough because everybody thinks it's just about domestic violence, and yet that is a major player. People become homeless for a whole range of reasons, and it could be, as you said in your intro, Michael, it can be from drug use or just economic stress or whatever that happens to be. Unfortunately, there seems to be somewhere in that person's past some domestic violence, or it becomes a part of that. And as we come up to International Women's Day on Monday, it's not just about women, but it certainly is, the primary numbers, this women certainly suffer more and are more affected by domestic violence and homelessness than are men. Not saying that men are not affected, because they certainly are. However, we look at the side of our particular shelter looks at the side of it from for women.
And it's emotional violence, not just physical as well. I think a lot of people, as soon as they hear domestic violence, they're instantly thinking physical abuse, but there's a big part of it, the emotional side of it as well, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the actual definition of what is domestic violence, it's just basically the violation of human rights. And that's coming from damaging social, economic, health consequences. It's any incident that is about controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour, violence or abuse. And I mean, that can be psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, financial, any of those sorts of things. And I mean, and it's really scary. And you said a lot of people don't talk to others about it, and that's quite true. And it gets to it builds to such a point that it's then not manageable for somebody, within their own person. And then that's when they need crisis help.
Yep.
And when that affects where they're living, that's when it affects you guys.
Yeah, so what is sort of that starting? Because I could imagine in this circumstances, if someone's a victim of violence, they're in a lease, they may have a 12-month lease, and the abuser knows their address. They feel trapped because they're in this document. They may not be fully financially independent, so they may not be able to break the lease or pay for 2 leases. I would say this is where the correlation, where an agent needs to know what rights and how they can help the victim, and also what the victim knows they can do to maybe change addresses and where they stand. Could you sort of go through how?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Mark, you're being very quiet today.
One other one, this is new, guys, so you may think that you have understood legislation with leases. This message doesn't just go out to citizens that are out there, but it also goes out to real estate agents, because you may think you know the law, but the law did change about a year ago or 2 years ago, Rosie.
It changed 2 years ago, and then we had a bit of a significant change just before Christmas, so just a couple of months ago. So
So we'll get into that in a sec. But guys and girls, just bear in mind, take note, because Rosie is the person that was part of this movement and this legislation change, a big part of it. So it's great to have you on today. It's an honour to have you on today. And let's get into it. Sorry, but I just wanted to frame that up.
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally just on 2 years ago, because it was the end of February 2 years ago that we actually got the introduction of the termination by a tenant. It was a new clause in the Residential Tenancies Act, and it was for termination in the circumstances of domestic violence. And basically it says that a tenant can end their tenancy immediately without penalty, and that was the real biggie. That was the without penalty. If they or their dependent child are in circumstances of domestic violence. So, usually the penalty would be a break lease fee, or perhaps if they're in the middle of a lease, or they'd have to give a certain number of days notice if they were moving out. So this has taken all of that off the table for people in circumstances of domestic violence. Obviously, they have to give evidence of that. Yeah. And
evidence.
What is that evidence?
Well, they've just broadened that. It was certificate of conviction of a domestic violence order. Now, many people don't have that. They might have an interim domestic violence order, or they might not have actually got to that stage yet because they're too frightened to go down that path. They might have an interim domestic violence order, but again, they might not yet have got to that stage. A family law injunction, so that might even be further down that path. But what really came in 2 years ago was a medical declaration. So a doctor could provide a declaration. Now, just before Christmas, so on the 11th of December, so a couple of months ago now, they turned it from a medical declaration into a declaration by a competent person. Now, that's a huge change, because that means that it's not just, they don't have to go to a doctor. If they're seeing, it comes under registered health professionals, and that is so broad. That goes from nurses to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health professionals, dental, medical, midwifery, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, podiatry, a whole range. And then you roll into, social workers who are a member of the Australian Association of Social Workers. So that would be something like the Northern Beaches Women's Shelter could give that evidence. So if someone's come there either via the police or via referral or via the community centre, which is one of the biggest referrals into the crisis accommodation. They could be coming from government or non-government agencies that actually have referral systems for assault and refuge, approved from the Victims' Rights and Supports Unit. So there's a whole range of ways people can now get that, but it's up to the agent to make sure, because the majority of people who are going through this, they're stressed. They're really stressed. And at that point in time, they may have heard of it, somebody may have told them about it, but it really is their property manager who's going to say, hey, if you give me this documentation, we can assist you to move from where you are into something that's safe for you. And that's really important. And that doesn't matter who the person is or what, because domestic violence, globally, it's about, it's not just men, it's not just women, it's, can be whether they're straight or gay or lesbian couples or, whatever type of gender or sexuality they have, it affects everybody. So, which means it affects all of our clients.
And I can imagine this is a big step in the right direction, because with what you originally said, convictions, people go through that struggle, and if you want to call it symptoms or acts, a conviction could be years down the path. So to have your doctor be, say you got the physical bruising, or I imagine a therapist, that's a big shift to obviously minimise, because a conviction is right at the end. So an AVO would be a part of that, the doctor. So, and that's probably where you've seen at the beginning of the grassroots from the shelter going, I can't break my lease because I don't have conviction, I'm too scared to come forward, where now there's a solution that you can get a JP, your therapist, a doctor, or competency. So that's big, I would imagine.
Yeah, the list of competent people to give this declaration is quite long. And, it can, it goes down to, even dental practitioners, because, if somebody's, if there has been physical violence, then maybe it's affected their, their mouth, their jaw, their dental, so there's a whole range of things here that where people can give that, can be, categorized as a competent person who can give that information. So I just think it's yes, all the practitioners within the, the shelter and the refuge system, need to know that, and they do. But the first place people go when they're having problems is probably to their property manager. So as real estate agents, you guys, need the new forms that are relevant, which are obviously on the New South Wales Fair Trading website, but, and you can refer people to that. So anybody that's, not an agent that's listening can go straight onto Fair Trading and get those, get them from an agent, or get them from another provider.
Is an agent competent to issue this?
No.
Okay.
No,
they're not on
another
the list.
question. Not on the list. Today's about education. Today's about awareness. But I also wanted to make it. There's also a part of this that it's a very thankless job, and what you have done with this legislation and all the people that are involved in women's shelter and the legislation change, I guess it's a very thankless task. And from the community and from real estate agents, thank you, because
yes,
people have been in a very, very difficult place for a very, very long time, and there hasn't been acknowledgement, or it's been a really difficult thing. Now, equally, and I'm going to touch on a really sensitive topic here, equally, it's been something really hard for an agent to say, because we're there to protect the landlord.
Indeed.
And it's been very hard to verify, very hard to acknowledge, or it's been very hard to hang our decision up on a piece of legislation to say the tenant has asked, so we must. So this has actually enabled these guys out there. But thank you for doing what you guys have done. And I part of today was I did get we have got a lot of feedback to talk about this on the show, and when I said to you, and this really triggered me, when I said to you, hey Rosie, I've just got a piece of advice, just need to get a bit of advice for another real estate agent. Are people abusing this legislation? Is this legislation, because there's in this particular circumstance, is it really going on, or is it not going on, or are you just trying to get out of your lease? You said something great. Do you remember what it was?
I did. I get quite passionate about this, and
yes,
I get quite passionate about a lot of things, and you know that. But and I said, yes, but people have been seen to be abusing this. But for goodness sake, if somebody's going to go out there and get a declaration from a competent person and say that they're in the circumstances of domestic violence, how unbelievably sad that is. Because and use that to get out of a lease. Because maybe somewhere down the track there's karma. But when you look at everything in life, I would rather go down the path and let a government go down the path of saying, here is an out for people. And I get that we need to protect the landlords, and that's your job, that's your fiduciary duty as an agent. But, if this means that, 0.5% or, probably less of the population that do this are abusing it, but then there's another 99.5% of the population that need this, that are getting the relief and the being able to leave a tenancy quickly and without penalty, then that's a great thing. People say, oh, we shouldn't have, the unemployment benefits because people abuse it. But you go back, 60, 70 years, it's better than what we had, where people were living in, moving to La Perouse and jumping off the gap. It's we can look at history and see what's been bad, what's been put in as social measures. And okay, yes, there's a percentage of the population that will abuse that, but honestly, somewhere that'll come back and bite them down the track. And it's better that we've got a system where people who absolutely need this can use it.
2 questions here. So what's the agent's role if the victim and abuser are on the same lease in the same property, and the victims put this forward to the agent, how obviously the agent, how does that play out? You wouldn't want the agent calling the abuser saying what's happened. How does this work if that's the scenario? Because I'm sure there's a lot of cases where they're under the same roof and they don't want to tell the agent. Fear the agent will tell the abuser and just create more mess. So how does that work? And then I got one other after this.
Well, obviously these are confidential documents. I mean, even if it were taken to the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, to NCAT, these are not documents. These evidence documents that you would present. You would state that you have them, but they are closed documents. They are confidential for this particular person. Okay, so and if the alleged perpetrator is living in the property, well then, as an agent, you then need to reassess. There's now one person living in the property, not two. Can they afford to live there? Because what's your job as an agent? You go back to your basic job as a property manager, and that is to collect the rent and ensure that the property is looked after. So, at the end of the day, you need to reassess whether that person can stay because can they afford to pay the rent? Because the victims they have the right to protection, they have the right to privacy, and protection from discrimination, really, in terms of how that plays out.
And this is my segue to the next one. Is the agent, if you've received these documents, are you obligated to then inform the police?
No.
Okay. Because then, so then.
No, your job is your job. You're not a social worker. You're not a police officer. You are a real estate agent, and you're dealing with a tenancy matter. And your job is to process the fact that this person is leaving, and you are not charging them for that. Yes, if there's damage, there's other issues to be looked at.
Yes.
And if the perpetrator is not in the property and there are other people in the property, then they get, a reduction in rent for a couple of weeks. But there's to help them work out either to get somebody else in or to move on or to whether they can afford to stay there. So there's a whole range of requirements around that for who's left at the property. Obviously, if it's the perpetrator, there is no reduction in rent. Yeah. But if it's not the perpetrator, then because your documents will name any one of these documents that you get will name who the alleged perpetrator is.
And what's the dialogue to the perpetrator? As in, they've broken the lease, they're out, nothing further. You don't have to say anything else. Obviously, you don't show the documents, but what, in your experience, how does the agent handle it?
All that needs to be said to the perpetrator is, okay, it's just you living in the property now.
Yep. End of story.
It's just you living in the property now. We now need to, we've been advised that the other person has left the premises. They have terminated their living arrangements in those premises. It's just you and somebody else, whatever the lease actually says. And then from that point, you actually move on and go, okay, fantastic. Let's take the normal property management approach to can this person afford to pay and are they looking after the property?
And the closed documents. Sorry, Mark. Yeah.
Guys, Rosie's, if you've got any questions for Rosie, I appreciate this is a sensitive topic. If you have a friend that you want to help and you've got any questions, throw them at Rosie right now. We will answer them right now. It's a live show, and we're happy to go through that. So back to you, Michael.
Yeah, and so the document from the competent person, closed document, does the agent share that with the landlord, or does the landlord take the agent's word? Right? How does that work?
No, it's a confidential document, and you're telling your landlord because you are their agent. You're standing in their shoes. There's your definition of what you do.
Yes.
You're saying I have these documents. They're obviously confidential documents, but they meet all of the requirements under the Residential Tenancies Act.
Yes.
For the documents that we need to collect in terms of evidence, and I mean, the majority of the stories I hear are that landlords are pretty good about it. They just go, "Oh my God, is the person safe?" The majority of people are decent human beings, and at that point they actually say, make sure that person's safe.
Yeah.
Then now let's move on to, okay, I've lost rent. Well, that's why you have landlord insurance. Just saying.
Before we wrap it up, Rosie, what are the numbers like this? And the reason I say this is you may be watching and you don't have any exposure to this, but it could be around the corner where you have a friend or family involved like this. But this is pretty serious. What are the numbers that in the course of someone's life that they're going to have an exposure to this? Is it like 1 in 3?
You hear different numbers, and different organisations give out different numbers. I know we turn a significant number of people away on the Northern Beaches, and because that's my sphere of information. Obviously, I'm actually meeting with the CEO of Women's Community Shelters this evening, and she has obviously a better understanding of the numbers on a state and a national basis. But I mean, our constant cry is, we're turning hundreds of women away every year, or up to around a dozen people a week, who need crisis accommodation. And there's no place for them. Yes, there's a quick overnight stuff that the government provide, but it doesn't come with all the associated services. I mean, the Northern Beaches Community Centre, or Community Northern Beaches, I think their new name is, do an amazing job of actually assessing all of that and, putting people in the right places and linking them with the right services. Because it's not just about a house or a roof over somebody's head. It's about connecting them, because there's so much else going on in their life. It's connecting them with the right services. I mean, I'm the chair of the shelter. My job is governance and opening doors to get money to make sure that we continue to operate, because we're not, we get money from council, but there's nothing much else. So it's all philanthropic donations. So, but the women the staff that actually do the job, they're connecting the women that come in for crisis accommodation to a whole barrage of allied services that they need to move on to the next phase of their life. And part of that is about finding affordable accommodation.
It's free. So the women that are coming in are not paying?
No. I mean, if there's capacity to pay, then they, ultimately end up paying if they move into transition. It's different. It's based on the individual's circumstances.
And I just Googled the statistics, and I'm sure this is very under, because the biggest thing it says here is most women don't report it. But just to give you a bit of numbers, it was in 2016, an estimated 17% of Australian women aged 18 years and over had experienced violence of a partner since the age of 15. So, it's not like 1 in 1,000. It's like 17, if not probably 25% of women ever experienced it at some time. So, just with what you said, Mark, it's not like no one's not going to know anyone. It's serious, and I reckon it could even be half of it, because it says a lot of people won't report it or seek help.
With my real estate educator hat on, swap back from shelter to real estate. Everywhere we go as trainers in real estate, agencies are saying, yeah, we've dealt with it. Everybody's dealing with it. I mean, and the unfortunate end result of that is that we have, a stat of, it's just over 1 woman a week dies of the result of domestic violence in Australia. And that's just not good enough. No. If we had 52 people die in a catastrophe, we'd be up in arms about it. And yet we just continue to let it roll.
For a long time, we had under 50 deaths, and half the country was locked down, and everyone was in a panic. So, it's huge.
Yeah. Now people are a little bit freer to get out.
Yep.
I mean, there wasn't a huge, surge at the beginning of COVID, as everybody said there might be, because people were locked down; they couldn't get away. It was when restrictions started easing and people started being able to get out a bit more that people then realised that they needed to leave.
Yeah.
So in certain living situations, and there's that two sides. There's the human side of it and the need to look after people. Then there's the side that you guys need to deal with on a daily basis, which is the tenancy side of it for people who need help to get out.
But it's also a lot of people won't know they can call the agent for help and do this as well. So it's good to bring that awareness. It's
correct. And that's about just getting it out there that's part of what you do.
Yep. Anything else you want to add on to this from agent point of view, the victim's point of view? I know it's a little bit longer than we normally do, but it's such a serious topic that to get the message out there. So is there anything we've missed?
I just think that people need to, there's maybe if more of us, and, and I'm taking this on as a provider of real estate education, maybe we should have on our websites something about, if you're in need, ring, the 1-800-RESPECT number. To get help. So putting it out there.
Respect. Okay.
Yeah. So putting that out there to actually say that, here's where you can get help, and then they'll refer you, find out where you are, refer you to the right area. I mean, on the Northern Beaches, get in touch with, Community Northern Beaches. Get in touch with the fabulous people at the community centre.
So how can people help the cause?
Money. Look, follow us on Facebook. Follow the Northern Beaches Women's Shelter on Facebook. If we need anything other than that, we actually put calls out for it. So if somebody's moving out and they're moving into their own accommodation, we're always looking for affordable accommodation for people to move to. So give them 12 months where they can sort of get themselves back on their feet. Doesn't whether it's granny flats or just safe sort of stuff. And Mark, I know we talked about some. A couple of months ago, which we probably need to revisit. But in terms of how that works, we to run the associated programs and the follow through and the this sector of our world gets doesn't get paid that well. When you look at the remuneration of other industries, and to have highly qualified staff providing these services and providing the support to people as that's our shelter website you've got up there.
Yeah, I'm just going to put the link in the comments for everyone.
Thank you so much. Just following that and finding it, when we need something, then we put that call out for it. And, that's, we always, and we do, we get lots of support from lots of people. And, you at Novak have supported us on many occasions over the years, maybe putting the hard word on, but it's always willingly given.
Yes.
So,
and always happy to have you on the show. Any message or events coming up, just give us the nudge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we sold out for the International Women's Day function on Monday in 5 days. So that was pretty exciting. Obviously, smaller numbers. We're down at Pasadena on Monday. But, it's there will be a large event coming up later in the year, and I will definitely come back on and plug it big time once we get all the details ready to launch.
Lock it in.
You should do one every quarter. Every year I speak to you about it, it's always sold out. It sounds like it's people want to support you.
They do. They really do. So, and as I said, the majority of people are decent human beings, and they realise that when people are doing it tough, it's up to the rest of the community to, close in around them and, help them back on their feet. And I mean, that's decent. That's respect. That's my definition of respect, when we actually witness decent human behaviour and care for other people. So, which is,
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. So, I think out of that, we've all decided that we're putting it on our websites that we, so people can actually see that if they need help, they can. There's a place to go for it.
Yep, and I'll put.
Well, look, one in five are exposed in their lives sometime. So when they are, that's simply a helping hand for them to help them through it, or stop it, or all that stuff.
Yeah, it is. And guys, thank you so much for having me on. Love talking with you guys, and obviously one of my passions. And thank you for letting me share all of that information.
Anytime. And thank you everyone for watching. Any questions, reach out to us, reach out to Rosie. We're here to help. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
You too.